I'm going to talk. I'm going to back it up a little bit. Maybe somebody here has the number of the top of their head, but all this talk about mobile and fragmentation, and it's a little. I don't know. Something like 93% of all online ad spend is search and display. That's it. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to go talk about the top 5 emerging categories in plain vanilla desktop search. And I'm going to do it a little bit differently than, Eli was talking about audience measurement. Very, very important, of course. What we do is very different. We measure advertisers, right? So the audience measurement, you're trying to figure out how someone gets to a website, what they do when they're there, and so on. We talk about what are they seeing, right? What's the message going out to those consumers? What are other advertisers doing? What works? What doesn't? And so this is a really neat little topic. I could probably hammer through it in about 5 minutes if I stuck to just what are the top 5 emerging categories in search. But I decided to, I don't want to do that. I'm going to treat you guys better than that. I'm going to add a little bit of insight, things that we could take away and maybe apply to other categories as well. So a little bit about us. I mentioned we're a market research firm. We don't manage campaigns or anything like that. We monitor advertising on the internet, display, SEO, paid search, 50 countries around the world. Been doing this since 2004. Have a book or two out. And our big claim to fame is our customers. Even though we don't manage any campaigns, they use our data. They're 3 times more likely to be seen on the search engines than their top 20 competitors. And we know that because we measure it every 15 minutes. It's our screensavers. So here's how we did this. We started with we have spend models, and to produce those spend models, we started with about 100 million or maybe a little more of known ad spend, and then we can correlate that with what we call occurrence data. So when we look and see an ad on Netflix, for instance, and we can tie that back to a data point, we can make predictions. So we use machine learning models to predict, all right, what are the click-through rates, CPCs, impressions, and so on. I skipped a few steps. It's really, really complicated. It takes us about 30 days to run through the whole process, start to finish. But it gives you some really cool insights, and I'll show you some of these. Pretty much what I just said here, with the addition of, we actually have 3 models. So we estimate click-through rates, cost per click, and sorry, that's a typo there. Click-through rate, cost per click, and impressions. You multiply those 3 things together, you get spend. Pretty simple. All right, why do we care? Well, here's what's interesting. U.S. AdWords desktop search is kind of flat for the year. It's the first year we're not seeing massive growth. At least, that's what our models are telling us. But some categories are booming. Some categories are declining, as you expect. So this is really invaluable if you're working at an agency. It's very helpful to know which categories you're going after, who the big players are. That's your short list. And if you're an advertiser, you can look at some of the different tactics and ways that these things play out in different industries, and you can use that to better your own campaigns. So our first category, booming category, is online education. We went from about $87 million in spend last year to about $196 million, so over a 220% increase in spend. That is fueled in no small part by a massive increase in the number of advertisers in the last year, with a corresponding increase in cost per click. So we can map that out. We look at clicks and impressions. You see impressions on the bottom. We have clicks on the left. The size of the circles is roughly how much they're spending. So if we look all the way to the right there, we see Walden U is the big player, followed by Education Connection, who's not far behind, and they're actually spending a lot less money. So they're a pretty savvy advertiser. I'm going to look into Walden U a little bit, right? So I went through, looked at all their ads, and they're focusing pretty much on 2 different things. Obviously, online classes, it's big. But they also target specific careers, and you can see one of those ads on the right, online nursing programs. Tons and tons and tons of these different ads, just really tailored, so really good targeting. And it's evidenced in their click-through rates, too. They're getting 6 to 8% click-through rates for many of their keywords, so above the norm. All right, our second category is IT solutions and services. I went from about 50 million to about 110 million this year in spend. Again, about a 220% increase. What was interesting is in 2010 and 2011, the category was flat. So it was really this year that it kind of blew the doors off the category. Again, looking at who are the big players. SAP, manage engine, Accenture. Now, what's interesting about this is you see that unlike the other category that we just looked at, education, you see there's one big player far on the right, and there's a number 2 and number 3, and then everybody kind of starts falling behind. With IT solutions, you see more opportunity here, which is interesting. And you can tell that because it's not much of a spread between the different players. In fact, take a look at Bing. You know, that first chart was Google, this is Bing. And you see a lot more opportunity right now just because it's not as mature of a platform, not as many advertisers on it yet. So it is a lot easier to succeed on Bing right now. Take another look at SAP, right? So we look at their spend over their last few years. Their strategy is focused on 3 main lines of business: CRM, business analytics, and ERP solutions. Pretty simple. All right, number 3, my category, internet marketing services. Went from 18 million to 45 million, 250% increase. We had a really big pop. Number of advertisers doubled in the last 3 years. So, you know, companies like my own, pretty much anybody selling anything to advertisers online falls in this category. There's a different way of looking at the big players. This is share of voice. Instead of looking at just the spend, we've isolated out the impressions. And so you can see the big player here is Constant Contact. They do a phenomenal job with their advertising. Anybody here really familiar with Constant Contact? A few people? All right. I may have some questions for you later. So we have jump fly, eye contact, and so on. What we're seeing with a lot of these advertisers is to be successful in this category and to really engage with people on the search engines, they're targeting SMBs, right? So we tend to target enterprise players. So ironically, we don't do a lot of AdWords or Bing advertising. But these companies do, right? So they're targeting small, medium-sized businesses. Now, what is interesting about them, though, is that there's a really high churn rate with these advertisers. And so they have to constantly refill the marketing bucket. And this is why their spend, you know, it doesn't go down over time. It tends to go up, and then it has to stay flat in order to keep the marketing budget going. And that's because of the churn. So this results in high acquisition costs, CPCs, pretty expensive, $3 to $6. Some of these keywords run $25 or more. It's incredible. And let's take a look at, this is Constant Contact. They're doing some really neat stuff. If you look at their number 2 ad, for instance, advertising daily deals is what they're focusing on. Really interesting stuff that you can see by looking at competitors' ads and how much they're spending on each one and so on. There we go. Another interesting thing we see by looking at Constant Contact is they're expanding, right? And we see a chunk of their spend now going towards Brazil. And we also see, check this out, 20% of their paid search clicks are now coming from Bing. We're seeing a lot more of that growth this year. Across many different categories. By the way, one of the questions I get a lot is, you know, what categories is Bing doing better on? What are they out-indexing? The biggest one that we see, retail finance, especially credit cards. It's a really hot category for Bing advertisers. All right, our 4th category, pharmaceuticals and supplements. This is a really interesting category because it has a lot of different players in it. We went from about 120 million to 180 million, or 150% increase in the last year. Again, number of advertisers doubled over the past 3 years. Check this out. It is higher this year, but it's trending down. So we had a big jump in late 2011, and that has started to decline this year. So will it still be as big of a category, a hot category in 2013? I don't know. Hopefully everybody can see this. These are the top 10 advertisers in the pharmaceutical category. A little hard to read because it's cut off here, but do you notice something about that? You would think that you would see more brand players in there, but what you're seeing instead are mini sites focused on symptoms, right? And this is that split that I was telling you about. So there are 2 players in here. We got prescription drugs, and what they're succeeding at is building out symptom-based mini sites, and that's how they're getting people to engage. So the advantage of this is you get higher impressions. People don't search for some of these obscure drug names, and you know, a lot of times they're hard to spell as well. With that, though, you get lower click-through rate, as you'd expect. And a couple examples there: cholesterolinfo.net, managingmybloodpressure.com, big players. The other side of the coin is the over-the-counter drugs and supplements. And so we see heavy reliance on brand name websites. So Claritin, for instance, Viagra. Lower impressions with these, but much higher click-through rate. If this is going to succeed for these guys, they have to do offline branding to support it. All right, our fifth category. I'm flying through this because I know we're running tight on time, so there'll be time for questions at the end. Estimated spend in home improvement. This is a really neat category. We went from 105 million to 145 million, about 140% increase. This is a really unusual vertical, though, because there are two big players, and that's Home Depot and Lowe's. And then everybody else is way, way, way off to the bottom left of that quadrant. So we're looking at, between $7 and $10 million each. That's in 1 month, by the way. That's October for those guys, and then $580K for the next one up. Same thing on Bing, right? The total amount of spend isn't as high, but again, the same exact thing. Another very interesting thing to keep in mind here, categories differ. You can't just run a pay-per-click ad and follow the same methods and the same campaigns across many different verticals. It doesn't work that way. So as an example, in home improvement, it is highly seasonal. We see this big jump, when the warm weather hits, and then it falls off in the winter. Another interesting thing, it is highly fragmented category, a lot of product-based searches. About 30% comes from just a few categories. We have brands such as Home Depot or Lowe's, kitchen, windows, air conditioning, solar panels, surprising new category there, and so on. Then everything else, there's hundreds and hundreds of different categories in that other bucket. But you can get a pretty big bang for your buck just focusing on those guys. All right, so takeaways. I mentioned offline branding, critical. If you've got a website, you can't afford to do some offline branding, it will increase your click-through rates on your ads, especially in your branded terms. The categories that we looked at, and there's a bunch of categories I looked at that were not on this list, but we see the same things: campaign strategies, who they're targeting, how they're engaging with users, whether it's product-based ads versus extending beyond the brand and into emotional connections and things like that. We see a lot of that with CPG and pharma. The CPC ranges are all over the place. Some categories are very, very expensive, others are not, and so on. The important thing to take away from all this is every category is different. You really need to understand what's going on in your business, in this line of business, if you expect to succeed. So enough from me. I'm going to turn it over and let you guys ask questions if you want.
Come on. Somebody's got to have a question.
In the pharmaceutical stuff,
he doesn't even need a mic.
Right. In the pharmaceutical stuff that you mentioned, how much of regulation, how much do you see that affecting? Because there's brand rules about what you can and cannot say in the ads and things like that.
Right.
Have you seen? Have there been any major changes to that type of thing that might be impacting?
The only thing I've seen, I didn't really get down to that level with pharma. I do see there are little notices in some of the ads now, legal notices and paid search ads. I'm not that close with pharma, though. I couldn't tell you.
Okay, they just have weird rules. That's
right.
If anybody here knows. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
And then, that's another reason for the mini sites. Right. Okay. All right. Well, if you guys have any questions, you can always come and see me after. Ways to get in touch.
Rich, where do you see the most change in the coming year in what you track?
So that's a really hard question, right? So you're probably going to be wrong if you guess based on trends. As you saw in pharma last year, I would have said, hey, pharma's huge this year, and now it's trending down. It's really hard to predict. Online education shows no signs of slowing down right now. We saw a number of other categories. I'll throw out a crazy one. Family matters, divorce attorneys, huge. People are just getting divorced, and these guys are figuring out how to reach people on Google. It's a surprising category, But it's really hard to say for 2013 what's going to happen. Your best bet is probably look at the categories that are growing now, and say, well, they'll probably continue to grow in the future. But you have to taper that with the fact that things will stop at some point. So.
Why do you think that was the case with the divorce?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe too much Facebook, Some people back there.
Do you have any plans on merging your data with, like, I know Google has the ability to look at keywords and the news around it, so and maybe something like that for your tool, because I'm thinking of online education that could be probably in response to all the federal crackdown on a lot of the for-profits.
So what's the question exactly?
Do you have any plans on merging like industry or like news kind of things that are going on in the environment and merging that with your data to kind of have a better like predictive modeling?
Oh, well, we do some of that now. So every month we go through and we find trending keywords and we add those automatically. You know, so we do some of that, but tends to be like a 30-day delay on that.
Rich, are you hiring?
Yeah, actually. Glad you asked, Rob. We are hiring.
What are numbers 6 and 7 on your list?
Oh man, you know, I didn't really go down that far. I mean, we looked at about 25 different things, but once I got number 5, I stopped ranking them. See me afterwards, and I'll get that data for you. How about that?
With the future thinking question, one of the things that I've been thinking about is with the election, how healthcare is, I think, going to become a very big trending thing into 13 and 14 with Obamacare likely to happen. Is there anything else coming out of the election that you guys have seen that is helping you identify what the trends would be into 13 and in the future?
Yeah, actually, if you go to our blog, we did a write-up just recently on creative things that we've seen, all the messaging in the election. It was really interesting. One of the things that I took away, not so much about future trends, but was the tone in the campaigns, you know, what they were focusing on. Surprisingly, online, for instance, this was is not a political statement. Romney's ads tend to focus on the message and the topics online, whereas Obama ads tend to be very negative, which was kind of the opposite of what you'd expect. But if you go to adgooroo.com/blog, scroll down a few articles, there's a big election article. You can see all that for yourself. All right.
Great. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Thanks.